morning session approached the executive officer, and he apparently hadn't quite figured out that he had the opportunity to speak while we were talking about agenda item 10, and he just wanted to give comments, so I'll invite him up. Chris McLaughlin.
And just to clarify, that was agenda item 13 that we were discussing.
Agenda item, he has 10 here, okay. Oh, you meant 13, okay.
Okay, you get to be the rock star too. You need
Okay. So it is agenda item 13 he wished to speak to.
Yeah, and agenda item 13, the hearing is closed and the vote's taken, but we can certainly hear this comment as well, though it won't be part of the record.
Okay.
So my name is Chris McLaughlin with the Western Agricultural Processors Association. We represent tree nut hullers throughout the state. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for allowing me to speak at this event, even though it's at a different time than I should have. But I wanted to thank everybody, and WAPA would also like to thank you for working with us so closely on this issue in terms of walnut processors and small food processors. We've worked with the staff for the last several months, specifically October and November, collecting data samples from walnut hullers throughout the state in terms of well samples, discharge samples, and then hull samples as well. We received these results in December and forwarded them to the regional board staff. It was a little late, but we've provided that information. We will work with the staff to interpret the results a little bit better and to determine the best course forward. And again, we sincerely appreciate the staff's cooperation in working with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and anytime we'll take those kind of compliments. Thank you very much. We're going to reorder a little bit. We'll hear the enforcement update as the last item of the day. Move on to item 10, revisions of, and let me read the procedure on that. This is the time and place for hearing to consider adoption of an order to revise waste discharge requirements for growers within the Western Tulare Lake Basin area. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? You submitted a card. Good, Laurel. Since there are persons present wishing to present evidence on this item, we will proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Total times allowed for testimony is as follows. Westland Water Quality Coalition, 10 minutes. The Environmental Justice Representative, Laura Firestone, 10 minutes. All other persons shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes. A timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
I do not.
Thank you. We'll now begin with the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Longley and members of the board. My name is Nick Smyra, and I'm an engineering geologist in your Fresno office. I will be presenting an overview of the proposed order revising waste discharge requirements for growers within the Western Tulare Lake Basin area, which are before you for consideration this afternoon. I will begin with an introduction describing why changes to the current waste discharge requirements are needed and the rationale behind the proposed order's contents, followed by an outline of how the proposed order will impact growers, and concluding with discussion regarding stakeholder input and final recommendations. In January of 2014, this board adopted waste discharge requirements for growers within the Western Tulare Lake Basin area, hereafter referred to as the current order. The Western Tulare Lake Basin area, outlined in red on this figure, I think I skipped ahead. Oh, I apologize.
When you get there, When you get there, you can point it out too. It's just
Okay,
the
I'll
way
go
it-
ahead and, yeah.
It's a Tulare Lake Basin. This board is
It's in West Fresno County and
Right.
Kings County.
right.
Okay.
So we have it in front of us. Thank you.
The proposed tentative order resolves a timing conflict between the designation of high vulnerability areas and some requirements for growers set by the current order. The current order requires that the coalition submit a groundwater quality assessment report by the 16th of February 2015. In addition to providing the foundational information for the development of groundwater monitoring programs, under the current order, the groundwater quality assessment report also identifies high vulnerability areas within the coalition's boundaries. Certain order requirements are due for growers operating in high vulnerability areas as early as the 1st of March 2015, approximately 2 weeks after the submission of a groundwater quality assessment report. This schedule does not provide sufficient time for board staff and the coalition to complete the groundwater quality assessment review process before some grower requirements are due. The proposed tentative order also considered the impacts that drought is having on growers within the western Tulare Lake Basin area. In January of 2014, Governor Brown issued an emergency proclamation for the state of California due to severe drought. The drought has caused significant impacts to many growers due to the decline in availability of surface water for irrigation and increased operational costs associated with additional groundwater pumping. The time schedule included in these revisions will provide growers with temporary relief by postponing costs of some requirements in the current order by 1 year. In September of 2014, the Agricultural Expert Panel provided recommendations to the State Board regarding data collection and reporting under the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. State Board has not yet provided an interpretation of these findings, which may change the content of what will be included within these summary reports. The tentative order proposes additional time for State Board to provide direction on the Agricultural Expert Panel's findings. In addition to those reasons discussed on the previous slide, modifications to the current time schedule are needed to address logistical challenges associated with the certification of nitrogen management plans and grower education and outreach. Regional board staff and the coalition groups have expended significant effort to develop the nitrogen management plan template, which was recently issued by the executive officer on the 24th of December 2014. Now that the contents of the nitrogen management plan template have been determined, efforts are currently underway to develop courses for individuals to certify these nitrogen management plans. It is anticipated that these courses will be available later this year. This education and outreach effort will require significant work on the part of the coalition, and the revised schedule in the tentative order will provide them with the time necessary to complete this task. In order to resolve those timing conflicts and the logistical challenges, the proposed tentative order revises the schedule for submission of some grower requirements. These requirements include the completion of a farm evaluation template, the preparation of nitrogen management plans, certification of nitrogen management plans, and the submittal of a nitrogen management plan summary report. The revised time schedule included in the proposed tentative order is consistent with the revised schedule adopted by the board in December of 2014 for growers within the Tulare Lake Basin area. Greater detail regarding these changes and how they will impact growers will be provided in the following slides. The first revision I will discuss, as shown on this slide, is a due date for farm evaluations for all farms located in high vulnerability areas. As discussed, the groundwater quality assessment report identifies high vulnerability areas within the coalition boundaries. The vertical red line in this figure represents the due date for the groundwater quality assessment report, while the horizontal arrow represents approximately the amount of time staff anticipates will be needed to review and approve this report. This yellow this yellow line represents the current due date for growers in high vulnerability areas to complete a farm evaluation. As illustrated by this figure, currently farm evaluations are due before high vulnerability areas will have been designated. The proposed tentative order revises the schedule to provide growers with an additional year to complete the farm evaluation. The second proposed revision includes changes to the nitrogen management plan deadline for large farms in high vulnerability areas. The implementation of nitrogen management planning is a foundational component to the Irrigated Lands Program and is an essential tool to help growers minimize excess nitrogen application relative to crop consumption. It is important that nitrogen management plans are prepared prior to the spring planting so growers will have them available to implement during the growing season. Therefore, the proposed tentative order does not significantly postpone the requirements for growers to prepare nitrogen management plans currently due on the 1st of March 2015. The proposed tentative order does, however, revise the deadline for large farms in high vulnerability areas to prepare nitrogen management plans by requiring that they prepare the plan within 90 days of the executive officer issuing the template. On the 24th of December 2014, the nitrogen management plan template was issued by the executive officer. Shown near the bottom of this figure is a vertical yellow line. The horizontal yellow arrow represents the 90 days growers will have to prepare the nitrogen management plan. However, as illustrated by the dashed yellow line, nitrogen management plans will be due for large farms and high vulnerability areas prior to the review and approval of the groundwater quality assessment report. To resolve this conflict and still require that these growers implement nitrogen management planning as soon as possible, the proposed tentative order now requires the coalition and the regional board staff to agree on a process for determining high and low vulnerability areas by the 16th of February 2015. Shown here is a black dash line. If an agreement on vulnerability designation process is not reached by this date, the executive officer can make the final determination regarding high and low vulnerability areas. On the 9th of January of this year, the regional board staff and representatives of the Westlands Water Quality Coalition met to discuss a process for determining high vulnerability areas. The coalition's proposed process consisted of an evaluation of physical properties, including but not limited to soil type, depth to groundwater, and existing water quality data, as well as an evaluation of existing management practices and crop types within the coalition's boundaries. This approach is consistent with the current order's requirements for designating high vulnerability areas, and therefore regional board staff and the coalition are close to agreement on the process for determining high vulnerability areas. During the meeting, board staff expressed concern regarding the evaluation of disadvantaged communities. Specifically, regional board staff wanted to ensure that all disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged unincorporated communities where water quality data, physical properties, and management practices warrant a high vulnerability designation are identified. Regional board staff are committed to working with the coalition to ensure that all disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged unincorporated communities are carefully evaluated when determining high vulnerability. The third proposed revision changes the nitrogen management plan certification deadline for large farms in high vulnerability areas. The proposed tentative order includes a 1-year extension for large farms in high vulnerability areas to certify their nitrogen management plans. As discussed previously, The one-year extension will provide additional time necessary to train individuals on how to certify nitrogen management plans and provide growers with temporary relief from the costs associated with certification during the ongoing drought.
And what do you mean by that? That if they're not farming that land, or what kind of relief does the drought bring to the farmer?
Postponing the certification would bring some relief by postponing the costs of having, if they choose to hire a CCA to certify their nitrogen management plan.
I understand that, but
Oh.
what does the drought have to do with that?
Dr. Longley, it basically, just with all the complexities and the drought going on and farmers having to deal with a lot of other issues, this gives them some relief in not having to worry about this aspect right now.
Okay, thank you.
Are also being impacted economically from the drought, and this will also reduce the cost.
I understand that big time, yes.
And the final proposed revision includes changes to the nitrogen management plan summary report deadline for large farms in high vulnerability areas. The proposed tentative order provides an additional year to submit a nitrogen management plan summary report. Providing growers with a one-year extension is appropriate based on the new proposed deadline for preparation and certification of nitrogen management plans. The one-year extension would also allow time for State Board to provide direction on the agricultural expert panel's findings, which may affect the content of what will be included in nitrogen management plan summary reports. In addition, significant work needs to be completed by the third-party groups with respect to the summary reports. The one-year extension.
I think your second bullet there is probably the most important one, in the sense that we don't want to be doing these and then redoing them again. And that State Board is, Pamela, have they given you any idea when they might wrap that up?
Well, it was supposed to be early this year, and it's been delayed, I understand. No, is the
No,
direct
well,
answer.
I think we need to find ways to encourage them.
I should have thought about that while Ms. Dodak was here today.
Yeah.
And Dr. Longley, I agree with you. I think that that's an important thing, but I also feel like, that could be a defense or a reason to delay things every single time. So even though I think that's important, I don't think that, just for
I understand.
That item on its
I get
own.
it, but we're not delaying the development and implementation of the nutrient, knowing that that may change as well. It's just the summary reporting, which is a key element to that, which wouldn't start for a period of time. Also, the certification is delayed by a year, but not, they still, and we have a copy of the nutrient management plan we approved and sent out to the coalition, so they do have to implement that, educate the growers on that, and develop it and implement it now. So that's not being delayed.
The one-year extension also allows time for the third-party groups to gather and evaluate the data and provide the regional board with accurate information. As discussed in an earlier slide, the revised time schedule included in the proposed tentative order is consistent with the revised time schedule adopted by the board in December of 2014 for growers within the Tulare Lake Basin area. The only significant change between the proposed tentative order and the adopted Tulare Lake Basin area order is that this order does not address wetland issues. Because no wetlands have been identified within the western Tulare Lake Basin area, these changes were not included in the tentative order. I will now briefly discuss the process regional board staff took to solicit interested parties for input. On the 17th of December 2014, regional board staff released a tentative order for public review. In addition to posting the order on our website, a Lyris email was sent to inform interested parties that the tentative order was available for public review and comment. To date, regional board staff have received no comments on the proposed tentative order. In conclusion, the proposed tentative order new schedule still requires growers to implement practices protective of water quality while also providing growers with temporary drought relief. The new schedule allows additional time for the State Board to provide direction regarding the Agricultural Expert Panel's recommendations and the Coalition to provide education and training to growers regarding nitrogen management planning. The revised time schedule and the proposed tentative order is consistent with the revised time schedule adopted by the board for growers within the Tulare Lake Basin area, and staff recommends this order for adoption by the board. At this time, I would like to submit this presentation and the Central Valley Water Board files associated with this item into the record. I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Any questions, board members?
Yep, I got it.
Go ahead, Ron. Go ahead, John.
So on the one slide that talked about notice, I just want to make sure that the only thing that it's not the only thing we're doing is sending out a listserv. I'm assuming we called the coalition. I'm assuming we worked with folks. That's a good assumption?
That's correct,
Okay.
yes. We sent the coalition group an administrative draft
Okay.
before we released a tentative
Just
order.
when I see on the slides that we noticed it and we sent out a listserv and nobody commented, that's a little stark. I just want to make sure that it's on the record that we actually had the engagement and whatnot. And then on the drought, maybe this goes to Carl's question. You couched it at the very end as drought relief, and it's really some economic relief due to knowing that there's other hardships due to the drought, right? We're not relieving. There's no drought relief per se, right? So it's just to be clear. Okay.
Thank you, John, for those comments. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Actually, I do have a question.
Yeah.
Is the 1 year in staff's opinion, the minimum amount of time that we could put this off? I mean, or is there a lesser amount of time that could still achieve the sort of the benefit that we're trying to grant here, given the conflicting timelines? Or is the 1 year the minimum?
The reason with the nutrient management and the summary reporting, it's all kind of aligned with a 1 year schedule. If we move out further than that, or not, say we move it out in a lesser time to July, it becomes yet less useful of a project. So, because they need to have their nutrient management plan in place by March. So with the summary reports, we're only asking for annual reports anyways, and so moving it out a year is kind of the minimum in this case. And really, I think it'll align well with the certification. With certification being required in a year, we'll have the summary reports due the following year. So we'll get our nutrient management plans in place. The education will happen, and I believe that's water quality will still be protected, and we'll have the reporting kick in the following years.
And the other issue is enough people trained to do self-certification where they're allowed to do that, or to have where they aren't doing self-certification, to have the folks trained out there who can do the self-certification. From what I've been seeing, there's sort of a lag in getting that effort underway.
Yes, and I actually have been in contact with our CDFA representative, and they are working on the curriculum right now. They intend to have some training for the trainers this summer, and to have classes beginning for growers and whatnot this fall. That's currently the schedule.
That's good, yeah. Yes, Bob?
I mean, the issue of nitrogen in drinking water doesn't stop for a year. And I think that, the question Carmen asked is where I am, is does this have to be a year, and what exactly does that mean in the end date? Again, if you could remind me, what would be the implementation date if we approve this?
The end date, the nutrient management or the nitrogen management plans aren't going out a year. They're just delayed by, I want to say, about a month or two at this point.
Okay.
If you could put that table back up.
Yeah, I saw that.
So the management of nitrogen and starting the practice of managing your nitrogen will start. It's the reporting aspects and the certification that are delayed.
And what is the final date for the certification and just
The certification for high vulnerability will be moved to next year.
what time, what day?
Hold on a second, let me.
I'm looking for a specific date.
I believe it'll be with the nutrient management plan submittal requirement, which will be March 15th, I believe, is the date in the order.
Attachment A in your.
Yeah. So March 15th is the day.
I believe that is the day.
And what I'm hearing is there's no real advantage deciding to do it by the end of the year because it doesn't affect anything.
Well, that's our concern, and the reason it was kind of the year was that if you try to implement nutrient management and put these plans together in July or August, as Adam mentioned, you're already through a significant portion of the growing season when most of the nutrients are being applied. So you really need to have this plan in place going into the growing season.
So it should be no later than March 15th.
And that's what, or at least by April, so that, they're in the process of doing that as they get into the growing season so that they control their their nitrogen applications for the entire year in order to get that done. So that was the reason we actually had active discussions about, should we implement it at like 6 months? But the thought is that we're too far into the growing season for that really to be an effective method to do that.
Clay, it was 90 days after we set the approval of the plan Adam sent out to you, and that was done at the end of December, so 90 days from that. And I think so that pushes us almost close to April 1st, actually, as a drop dead for implementing the nutrient management plan.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to get the definitive, I'm with Carl as, droughts happen, and if we can provide some relief, okay. I understand an extending because other prior conditions won't be met, and so that's a very good reason to extend. But I'm trying to get the definitive answer about why don't we make it December 31st of this year, 2015, for the extension of this? Why are we making it a year? And what I'm hearing is it doesn't help us on the ground. We might, to have it shorter than a year.
It doesn't, I think some of the issues, there are a couple things here. We talk about summary report. Well, part of this is also played into the state board activities. I think Dr. Longley pointed that. That's probably the biggest thing. And when we talk about reporting summary, it's not just that they turn in a piece of paper and they give it to us. There's development, especially for some of the coalitions, and I think all of them are developing some way of gathering, inputting, and summarizing that data to provide it to the board. There's an expense associated with that part of the element, and that's a high cost. And so if out of all what the state board's doing is going to change all of that, then that cost may even go up more. So we're a little sensitive to the fact that we don't know yet what the state board's going to tell us we need to do or change. And so some of this, we're sensitive to the fact that we're going to be setting them on a path to comply with something that may have to change, and that's an added cost. So that's a concern of ours. But where we weren't willing to bend was on the implementation of a nutrient management plan itself.
Yeah, and I'm asking these questions. I really appreciate staff's work on this. I just am trying to elicit that definitive reasoning for this extension and how long it is, and then the defensibility of making this, for the board to adopt this, I guess. Thank you for that, too. I appreciate it.
I share your concerns, Bob, and these questions that I've asked in the past of board, but obviously we'd like to have the data today. We'd like to have this plan in place a long time ago, but there's realities we have to live with, and one of the realities that concerns me is the state board report, which should be out sooner rather than later, and I noticed that Food and Ag got their report out quite promptly, and this report coming out with the state board, I think there are some issues with the data that they gathered. Certainly, Region 3 is involved in this too. How all of this is sorted out could greatly affect what we end up with, and that's my concern, and I think we have to work through this with the state board once they finally get the report together. The amazing thing is we can't talk to the people down at the state board about it because it's still in front of the state board and it's ex parte at this point. So other than telling them we need we need it now. So it's an issue we have to deal with. Thank you.
And Pamela, I appreciate your comment about not bending on implementation because, I think that we all will recall that environmental justice, thought that things weren't moving fast enough. And so we were trying to balance it out with having something efficiency that worked for the growers and something that felt fair for environmental justice. And here we sort of have these trigger words of, large farm, high vulnerability area. And it's almost like the red box combination of characteristics that we were really concerned about. So I'm glad that, staff has not bent on implementation because that's really important. And sounds like the reporting the reasons for the delay in reporting are justified. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I wished we could have done this about 100 years ago. We wouldn't be even having this discussion today, but we live with what we have. But also, I'm sensitive to some of the expert panel's opinions. I think a lot of people know I was pretty upset with a lot of the expert panel and the way they presented things, but I was sensitive to them stating the difficulty of trying to educate the growers, the difficulty of trying to even implement such a program, and the amount of time it's going to take to educate the growers. So that's why so far, you can't just look at the irrigated lands program on its own. We've got CV salts and the efforts of trying to accelerate providing safe drinking water to our communities while we get these source control programs in place. Because even if we had this about 20 years ago, they still wouldn't have clean water today. So not in most areas. So that's still going to be an issue for now into the future. But I am sensitive to the fact that this is going to be really difficult to implement by the coalitions with all the growers and the different types of growers, smaller and large. I don't think the larger ones will have to deal with so much as all of the many little growers, small growers that really it's going to be a difficult educational process.
That's right, and it might be pointed out that this is already underway in eastern San Joaquin County Coalition. That's not East San Joaquin County, the Eastern San Joaquin Coalition. Do I have that right? Yeah, they're already presenting these, and in fact, I plan to go to one of their workshops where they do put this out. But the complaints I've heard is simply this bit of, it's not so much the time to train the individuals; it's getting this whole apparatus underway. And you heard the time schedule that Department of Food and Ag has for educating people so they can educate people, and that's too bad. Okay, thank you.
Also, we at the last board meeting we did adopt a similar extension of time, so we are also sensitive to being somewhat consistent with all the coalitions on what we provide.
I have a card for Russ Freeman representing Westlands Water Quality Coalition. Westlands Water Quality Coalition, excuse me.
Good afternoon, Chair Longley and members of the board. My name is Russ Freeman, and I'm the coordinator for the Westlands Water Quality Coalition. We represent the irrigators in the western Tulare Basin, and I want to thank the staff, local staff from Regional Board for presenting their presentation to you guys and their support of the extensions that we requested. I think it's going to be important for our coalition to move forward with those. We have done a lot of work to this point on getting ready with that, and Nick mentioned we met on the 9th of January earlier to review our administrative draft of our groundwater assessment report, and they did have a lot of input for us at that meeting, and we were mindful of that input, and we've included those changes in our most recent draft, which will be final by the 16th of February, and then we'll begin the process of identifying the high vulnerability areas within our coalition, and we'll be able to tell those growers that are identified in the high vulnerability area what they need to do, which is the first step of preparing their nitrogen management plan, which if the board conforms to what was in the order originally, the 90-day schedule will be due about 22 days later than it originally was. And we do intend to adhere to that schedule and make sure that the people in the high vulnerability areas have that nitrogen management plan prepared. The certification won't come for a year later, unfortunately. As Dr. Longley mentioned, there's this process in place to try and get people certified or help them understand what they need to do to become certified and go through that. A couple other things we're doing with the coalition to meet the deadlines of the order. We're completing our sediment discharge erosion assessment report, which is due on the same day as our groundwater assessment report. That's on track to be completed and submitted on time. And I think those are the three major cornerstone elements of the order that we need to comply with. Of course, we have the summary report that will be due if the extension is granted in another year. We think that's, getting the elements of that report understood well will help us prepare that in a better way and help us comply with that order some more. I don't have much more in the way of comments to make other than to offer general support for the extensions. I would like to answer any questions that the board has. I understand I've got another 7 minutes to do so. And
When we ask questions, it's on us.
oh,
So-
okay. Well,
So are there any questions, members of the board, or any comments? Thank you for your testimony.
okay. Thank you.
Laurel Firestone, Community Water Center, and a lot of other things.
Thank you. And so Laurel Firestone Community Water Center, I did take the oath. Is there something else I need to say at the beginning? Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Community Water Center, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Clean Water Fund, the Agua Coalition. We made comments when a similar proposal was made on that was approved for the Tulare Lake Basin, and so felt it was appropriate to make the same comments today. We really appreciate the discussion the board's already had, and I think that was, our concern is that it's been delayed to get to this point already. We need to be a lot further along than we are today. The format of the regulatory program is this cascading regulatory process where if one thing's delayed, it can push back the whole thing and ultimately mean that we're not getting to the goals that we need to get to. And that, there's real communities and real lives at stake here, and the costs on communities continue and are very real. And so I do appreciate the discussion that's already happened from everybody in terms of acknowledging the need to really not delay anything in the implementation. If anything, see how we can accelerate implementation. The drought impacts not only cost to growers, obviously, and many other things, but also on communities and community water supplies and water quality. And as there's less recharge of good water, the water quality tends to worsen and concentrate contaminants, particularly nitrate. We've seen additionally many communities lose water wells from lost water capacity and have to turn to backup wells that have nitrate contamination. And so, the problem is increasing for communities. We really hope that the implementation and speed increases. We know there's a lot of complications and people are working hard, but appreciate your leadership to make sure that continues and that we move forward as quickly as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Laurel, you're real familiar with what's going on at the state board and what has, and appreciate the input that you've provided on that, because I think we share some concerns about where that process may be going. And it can impact this greatly. So I don't want that to go askew, certainly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Laurel? I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no other cards. Was there anyone else? Oh, Laurel, I do have a question for you. Sorry.
He was just waiting for you to get way in the
Yeah,
back
I
of the
know.
room.
Yes.
This thing, do you
Yes.
have any comments on this? This is the nitrogen management plan worksheet. Have you seen it? Let me give you a copy.
That was developed by,
I believe your group was involved in it. That's just the final document.
oh,
they
okay,
put
yeah, I
together.
just probably haven't seen that layout.
That's the pretty copy
Oh,
Perry
yes,
put together.
yes. Yeah, I think we have a meeting scheduled with staff to talk about this next week.
Yes, next week, February 11th.
Good. Well, we'll be looking for your comments.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's really important that we're collecting data and the right data early and transparently, and that's the way that we're going to be able to really achieve the goals that we need to get to, and all have confidence that we really are making the progress that we need to make. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no more questions for you. Okay. And I asked if there was anyone else wishing to comment, seeing none. Closing comment by staff, please.
I guess it'll be the EO, but we recommend adoption of the proposed changes by staff.
Okay. And I'll then close the hearing unless board members have any questions before I close the hearing. Thank you. Hearing's closed, so we'll go through deliberation and voting.
I'd make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation on this. And I did ask those probing questions about timing and making sure this was the minimum time, and I think we got some good definitive answers from staff and the executive officer, and I appreciate their work, the work of the dischargers, and the water environmental justice folks. So we'll get this done. And I agree with you, 100 years ago would have been good.
Yep, it'd have been nice way back in the beginning. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Bob's moved and Carmen seconded. There are no late revisions, am I correct?
No late revisions.
Good, thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Costantino?
Aye.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Ms. Kadara?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider? Dr. Longley?
Aye,
Motion carries.
thank you. Good. We're back in session. And we're on agenda item 11. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider adoption of MPDS permit for the original 16-to-1 mine in Sierra County. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed actions and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Okay, since you're not, okay, fine. He does. Okay, fine. Since there are persons present wishing to contest this item, we will proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. This time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do. Thank you very much. The designated party is original 16-to-1 mine. The total times allowed for testimony are as follows. For the original 16-to-1 mine, 15 minutes. All other persons or interested persons shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes, and a timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
I don't have any legal issues, but I will have some suggested late revisions.
Thank you, David. Very good. We'll begin with testimony by staff.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Elizabeth Thayer, and I am an engineer in the board's Rancho Cordova office. I have taken the oath. This presentation is regarding the proposed NPDES permit for 16-to-1 mine. '16-to-1 mine property is located in the town of Allegheny in Sierra County, approximately 90 miles northeast of downtown Sacramento. Allegheny is circled in blue. The schematic, although not to scale, shows the relative location of the mine, indicated by the red star. Here is a topographic map showing the town of Allegheny, 16-to-1 mine, and Kanaka Creek, which is highlighted by the blue line. Kanaka Creek is the receiving water for the mine discharge. It flows to the southwest from right to left on the map toward the Middle Yuba River. This is a photo of Main Street in Allegheny. Allegheny is a very small town with a population of 56 as of July 2014. Per capita income in 2014 was approximately $29,000 per year. This slide shows the mine entrance to the left and the lower shop building on the right. Note the dense forest in the background and the steep slopes. (16-to-1) mine is currently an active gold mine. This slide shows an example of the gold ore that comes from the mine. There is a lot of history between 16-to-1 mine and the Central Valley Water Board, and I'm going to touch on parts of it in this presentation. Prior to 2002, the discharger failed to comply with board requirements and enforcement, primarily for the mine discharge exceeding permit limits, failure to monitor effluent and receiving water, failure to submit required reports, and failure to pay fees and assessed fines. In March 2002, the board renewed the NPDES permit, adopted a new cease and desist order, and adopted a referral to the Attorney General for appropriate action regarding the discharger's failure to comply with the board's permit requirements and enforcement actions. The discharger petitioned the 2002 permit to the State Water Board, and in April 2003, the State Water Board adopted an order that required the permit to contain technology-based effluent limits based on the Federal Effluent Limitation Guidelines, or ELGs, and changed some of the effluent and receiving water monitoring requirements. In June of 2003, the Central Valley Water Board amended the permit to conform to the State Board order. The permit required monthly monitoring from 2003 through 2007. However, the discharger only submitted monitoring results in 2004. The permit also required the discharger to submit a complete application for renewal of the permit by September 2006. However, the discharger submitted an application in March 2008 after the permit expired. Staff reviewed the application and in a letter dated July 2008 identified insufficiencies and listed the documents necessary for a complete application. In August 2008, the discharger submitted additional information, but not all the requested documents, and the application remained incomplete. Federal law under 40 CFR section 122.6 doesn't allow us to issue a permit without a complete application. The permit expired in March 2007. The mine has been discharging without a permit since then. In 2009, the Attorney General's office filed suit on behalf of the people of the state of California and the Central Valley Water Board against original 16-to-1 Mine Incorporated and Michael Miller for failure to submit the monitoring reports required by the previous permit. Mandatory minimum penalties, or MMPs, were accumulated by the discharger when reports were not submitted during the last permit term, which was a major factor in the Attorney General's suit. The suit is nearing settlement. On 17 June 2011, board staff went to 16-to-1 Mine to inspect the mine discharge and collect samples for analysis. On 23 June 2011, just a couple of weeks later, board staff again went to the mine to collect effluent and receiving water samples from Kanaka Creek, upstream and downstream of the discharge. With the discharger's 2004 monitoring results and the 2011 samples collected by staff, we determined that we had enough information to write a new permit. Once the permit development phase begins, the timeline becomes more condensed. In mid-2003, staff compiled all the data and drafted preliminary effluent limits and a draft permit. On 10 July 2014, staff submitted the preliminary draft to Mr. Miller using the most recent email and P.O. box on record and requiring comments and edits by July 24th, 2014. A preliminary draft is not required by law, but is a courtesy that this board extends to all dischargers. It allows the discharger to review the permit before the public process period and to request a compliance schedule if the discharge cannot meet the proposed effluent limits. We called Mr. Miller to find out if he had received the preliminary draft and found that it was inadvertently sent to his personal address instead of his business. Therefore, we allowed additional time for Mr. Miller to respond. The discharger submitted a letter to the board on July 28th stating that he found it unreasonable to review the draft permit in 10 days and to determine a compliance project and schedule. We scheduled a meeting in early August to discuss the permit and to remind Mr. Miller that a compliance schedule and timeline were needed. The tentative order was sent out for public review on October 2nd, requiring posting of the February 2015 board meeting and requiring comments by November 3rd. We had a telephone conference on October 21st, reminding Mr. Miller again that he needed a compliance schedule for MMP protection, and we went over the permit requirements again. At the end of the 30-day public comment period for the tentative draft order, Mr. Miller submitted his comments by November 3rd as required, and these comments and staff response to the comments are part of the package for you. On December 18th, we met with Mr. Miller for the third time, where we agreed that the compliance schedule would be submitted by January 30th, so that if approved, the schedule could correspond with the adoption date of the permit before the board today and not place 16-1 mine in immediate non-compliance. On January 6th, the Central Valley Water Board's mine program manager conducted a site inspection and met with Mr. Miller. On January 30th, the compliance project and schedule were due. On this Monday, February 2nd, the discharger submitted the compliance project and schedule. This photo was taken from inside the mine and shows the discharge from the mine as it flows toward Kanaka Creek at the top of the photo. This photo was taken outside the mine and shows the discharge from the mine at the bottom of the slide in the center as it enters Kanaka Creek, which is the white water flowing from left to right. The high concentration of constituents in mine drainage does not occur naturally. Mining activities fracture the natural rock, exposing a much larger surface area of mineral deposits to oxygen and water. The increase in contact with oxygen and water results in more chemical reactions that in turn increase the mineral constituents in the mine drainage. In addition, the underground passages and drainage system of the mine create a conduit for the mineral-laden water to discharge directly to surface water. Thus, mining activities can cause an increase in the concentration of constituents in the mine drainage above water quality standards, including the California Toxics Rule, or CTR, criteria for heavy metals and drinking water standards for arsenic and minerals. Often, treatment or control of mine discharge is necessary to meet water quality standards, but costly to the discharger. In regards to water quality at 16-1 mine, the receiving water, Kanaka Creek, is on the US EPA's 303D list of impaired water bodies due to arsenic. The The mine's monitoring data indicates that the mine discharge frequently exceeds the arsenic and electrical conductivity, or EC, effluent limits of the previous permit and under the proposed permit. The discharge will not be in compliance with the final effluent limits for arsenic and EC without treatment or control. The laboratory data also reported concentrations of other metals and minerals above water quality criteria in the mine effluent. Therefore, the proposed permit includes new effluent limits for antimony, cadmium, copper, iron, lead, manganese, and nickel. The discharge will have difficulty meeting all effluent limits, not just arsenic and EC. To date, the discharge from 16-1 mine enters Kanaka Creek with no attempt at treatment or control. We have a lot of arsenic data for the mine effluent, shown by the blue line, but not much data for arsenic in Kanaka Creek. At R1, 100 feet upstream of the discharge point, the concentrations are shown in green. You can just see a few bits of green at the bottom of the graph near the 0 line. Samples from 300 feet downstream of the discharge are shown as R2 in yellow. As you can see, the effluent arsenic is much higher than the background arsenic at R1. You can also see that the downstream arsenic at R2 is almost always higher than the background arsenic at R1. The mine effluent is the only known source of arsenic between R1 and R2. This graph shows that the discharge from the mine is having an impact on the downstream arsenic concentrations. This slide also includes 3 red lines representing applicable water quality criteria for arsenic. The effluent arsenic regularly exceeds all 3 criteria. The downstream samples often exceed the drinking water standard and occasionally exceed the CTR chronic aquatic life criterion. More data was available for EC in the effluent and the receiving water. EC is a conservative consultant, meaning it's not very reactive and therefore lasts a long time in the water. Thus, it often is used as a tracer of the effluent flow in receiving waters. This graph shows concentrations of EC from samples of the effluent from the mine, shown in blue, upstream of the discharge in green, and downstream of the discharge in yellow. As you can see, as with arsenic, the effluent has the highest concentrations of EC, and the upstream receiving water or background has the lowest concentrations. Like with arsenic, the downstream receiving water is being impacted by the discharge from the mine. This slide shows the other mines within our region that have wrestled with the same issues that face 16-1 mine. The other mines' discharge exceeds water quality criteria, and they have implemented low-tech treatment systems that bring their discharge into compliance. Several successful low-tech treatment systems that are currently in use are constructed bioreactor infiltration gallery, skid-mounted commercial filters, and a slightly higher technology system, the mobile water treatment system. Treatment is reasonable and feasible. Comparing the previous permit with the proposed permit includes more water quality-based effluent limits and fewer technology-based effluent limits than the previous permit. The proposed water quality-based effluent limits are more stringent than the previous permit's technology-based effluent limits. And by law, the more stringent limits must be included in the proposed permit. However, the proposed permit reduces the monitoring frequencies significantly. This is possible because the discharge has remained relatively consistent through the years, and monitoring confirms what is already known. More frequent monitoring is not necessary and costly. During the public comment period, comments were received from Michael Miller, president of Original 16-1 Mine Incorporated. Mr. Miller commented that the pollutants in the mine discharge are naturally occurring and the beneficial uses of Kanaka Creek have not been adversely impacted. Mr. Miller also commented that the discharge from the mine will be in immediate noncompliance with the arsenic and EC effluent limits in the proposed permit. Mr. Miller's first two comments, that the pollutants are naturally occurring and that beneficial uses have not been impacted, have been addressed throughout this presentation. The high concentration of pollutants in the mine discharge does not occur naturally. It occurs as a consequence of mining activities, as shown earlier on slide 16. Beneficial uses have been impacted by the mine discharge. Kanaka Creek is 303 listed as an impaired water body due to arsenic, and as you saw in the arsenic graph on slide 19, the mine discharge contains high arsenic concentrations amongst other pollutants that impact downstream receiving water. In response to Mr. Miller's comment that the mine will be in immediate noncompliance with the permit, staff had several meetings with Mr. Miller where we requested a compliance project and schedule as previously presented on slides 12 and 13. In December, board staff and Mr. Miller agreed that a compliance schedule would be submitted to the board by 30 January 2015 so staff could address the proposed project and schedule today at this board meeting. But just this past Monday, 2 February 2015, Mr. Miller submitted a compliance schedule outlining various potential projects. Water Code Section 13300 states when a regional board finds that a discharge of waste is taking place that violates requirements, the board may require the discharger to submit for approval of the board a detailed time schedule of specific actions the discharger shall take in order to correct or prevent a violation of permit requirements. The Water Code also requires that all affected persons must be given 30-day notice of the proposed board action. The next board meeting is 16 and 17 April 2015. Today we propose a late revision to extend the effective date of the permit to align with the April board meeting. To provide the requisite public notice, the April board meeting staff will propose a compliance schedule approved by our executive officer. Chair Longley and members of the board, you have options before you today. You may choose to adopt the proposed permit today and adopt the compliance schedule at the April board meeting, or you may postpone adoption of the proposed permit and adopt both the proposed permit and compliance schedule at the April board meeting, or you may choose not to adopt the proposed permit. In closure, we recommend adoption of the proposed NPDES permit with late revisions to be accompanied by a time schedule order prepared for the April board meeting. We would like to enter the staff presentation, the agenda package with late revisions, and the case files for this facility into the record. This concludes my presentation, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Questions by board members? Carmen?
I don't recall seeing a proposal like this before where we adopt it now for, a date in the future. It seems almost like we would have just continued the item to another date, but I know April's a busy month. So can you tell me whether this is very common or if this is a unique circumstance?
This is for NPDES permits. I'm sorry. All NPDES permits take a certain amount of time to become effective. Typically, this permit before the late revision would have taken effect on April 1st. So what we're doing is extending it by 15 days or something like that. So it gives us time to get a time schedule in place. So there's not immediate noncompliance, MMPs, and things like that. We have a memorandum of understanding with EPA that sets that or establishes that it should be around 50 days or so. We've touched base with EPA and they're okay with us extending this in this case.
No, it's not common that we don't bring the accompanying compliance schedule order with the order to the board. This is unique. This permit is very old in EPA. It's on our backlog. So we would like to get it off our backlog, but we also are sensitive to putting them in immediate noncompliance. That's why we have the extension of the, what's the date what's the term of that date?
Effective date.
Effective date. And that would give us time to get the public notice out for the time schedule order. That's why if we've told the board, deliberate about this and then continue the item, and then it would just the time schedule order would be open for review and comment by the public. I think, if I'm not misspeak, is that correct, David? Thank you. And so you could do it all at one time, or you could adopt the permit today and the time schedule, and there'd still be no harm to Mr. Miller at that point. See, we did get his request and infeasibility report too late for us to be able to meet the public comment period.
Well, I appreciate that the board takes that into, or that staff takes that into consideration. Thanks.
Any further comments by board members?
And so maybe I want to hear from Mr. Miller first, but so I'll reserve my time.
You got all the time you need, John. You're a board member. Thank you very much for your testimony. We'd like to hear testimony now from, we invite testimony from Mr. Michael Miller, president of the original 16-to-1 mine.
I can get it.
You remove our presentation from the screen.
My name is Michael Miller. My address is P.O. Box 909, Allegheny, California.
Just a moment, sir. Why don't you take that presentation off? There we go. I'm sorry, we had administrative issue to take care of. Go ahead,
It's
sir.
okay. I'm the president of Original 16-to-1 Mine Incorporated, California Corporation, incorporated in 1911. So over 103 years old. I'm a director. I became a director in 1977 and the president in 1983. I have a little preparation for you, but before I do that, one thing I want to really extend, as many people have, but from a different basis, and acknowledge the effort of working with your staff. It is far superior to 20 or 15 years ago. There's a general lack of arrogance and an understanding that it's not a police state. I feel that we have differences of opinions, that we've aired, and we've given each other time to try to solve something that if I were listening to Elizabeth's presentation and knew nothing else about the original 16-to-1, I would think they're a bunch of outlaws up there running around amok. That's not the case. So I want to just comment first on some of the things that I learned today in the presentation. That to tell you, first of all, there is another side to what you just heard. The chronology of the events. The primary reason that there was so much confusion is the lack of addressing the fact that the original 16-1 took the most dramatic effort it could in abating and terminating a problem that it didn't create, at least not in the last 50 years, when we quit running the mill. 1998. There's a strong history and chronology of attempts by me and others to inform the staff that we quit running the mill. Our permit in 1998 was the same as 93, and it was the same as 2003. We were spending $65,000 a year on testing. We did 1,440 tests a year. We established that the situation in Allegheny, while it's been mining since the 1860s, part of our property, was seasonal. Water flows depends on the climate and the weather. The flow coming in and out of the mine depends on the climate and the weather. The main thing that is we don't treat the water. We don't use the water. It's not wastewater. It's not wastewater. We had numerous meetings, and we had time to get up to this point where we are today. I'm glad that Ms. Thayer said that there was a backlog. That wasn't our problem. We didn't delay this. Wasn't our delay. We tried to do what we could do at the time we had in a small company, and there's no blame for anyone on having this come before you at such a late date. I like that one slide about in the mine. I wanted to mention it to you. It was kind of overly green, but the green, it's not that green, but it's algae. Algae's a good sign for wastewater or water discharge. Let's call it a discharge coming out. It means that there's vegetation and growth. It's not like the mine you saw in Reading. It doesn't compare with that at all. It's a beautiful, beautiful Kanaka Creek. By the way, the line on the green map, I wish it was that big a river. It's classified by Fish and Game as an intermittent creek. It means that it dries up. It's subject completely to the weather, the snow runoff and different times like that. Likewise, so is the discharge. There was 35 miles of tunnels that were put in there going back to, actually to 1968, excuse me, 1868, which is small compared to the Empire Mine in Grass Valley, which is 350 miles of tunnels. We had submitted so many records and so many reports, and we were still doing testing that cost us quite a bit of money. And we are very pleased, by the way, I'm supportive of the process that you may or may not adopt today, because I've been assured that we don't agree with everything. But we've had great conversations, and we will live within the law. We might try to change a few things because they're unreasonable and they're out of touch with reality. But basically, this is a far superior attempt to take care of the needs of the federal Clean Water Act, as well as the Port of Cologne and other issues that are out there that are putting the quality of water in the proper place that it should be. I like all the language. I like the fact that it's supposed to be the impact of beneficial use. There's supposed to be public benefit for the public. Closing this mine down that's been operating for over 100 years. By the way, it's the oldest U.S. Mining corporation. It's the longest working mine in North America. And it's a very unusual deposit. It's very unusual. The aquatic insect and the fish. There's absolutely no evidence up and down Kanaka Creek of any harm. In fact, some people would be up here giving you an argument that we should not alter this because it's probably been in effect, which I disagree with a little bit with some of the people here, for millions of years. I mean, you'd have to, there's one geologist I hear on the board, and there was somebody else that was a geologist in the audience. We could have a wonderful topic on the formation of the California Gold Belt. It goes from Plumas County to Mariposa County. It's safe to say that it's the most proven gold belt in the world with the fewest number of miners working it. There's one company. And we have a very diminished crew right now for reasons that are not, I can't lay to the feet of the water agency, but I can say that there are certain things that have happened in our industry, which is a vital industry to California. It's vital to rural Northern California. It's vital to Sierra County. It's vital to Plumas County to have the type of mining that we do in the 21st century. The miners today won't create a Malakoff diggings. They won't flood Sacramento. They won't take away any farmland. The best thing about this is what I noticed and why I'm supportive of working within this. There's two reasons. I was ready to walk out of here at the lunchtime. I really was. I said, I can't do it. But thank you to everybody who I talked with and said, wow, this is your opportunity to talk to the board. And I've sat in your shoes. For 17 years, I've been chairman and a member of a planning commission and 5 years on a school board, county school board. And so I know sitting in those chairs, it's a little more enjoyable than standing in front of you.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's true. Having said that, my presentation has really changed. I'm here because our industry is getting a bad rap. It's It's not like what people think. We're not coal miners. We're a very specialized type of an industry, and it's vital. It's a vital industry for California. Why? It creates blue-collar jobs with good pay. It's domestic productivity. And more importantly than anything else, it is increases the GDP. And if we're going to increase and diminish poverty, if we're going to do things in this country, we need to produce more, not just take it from those that are producing. We have a wonderful, wonderful economic resource in California, and it's sad to say that there's so few mines, one in the Mother Lode or Northern Mines, that's operating right now. One of the issues that has changed modestly is the classification, and the 1, 2, and 3, and the A, B, and C. We're now going to be classified as a 2C. I wish we'd had this maybe 15 years ago. We wouldn't have been hammered with MMPs and a lawsuit of $2.1 million for not filing 13 reports. I mean, it's insane. And when you look at the MMPs and other people that have had meetings and they've come away without anything because of something that happens behind closed doors, there's the main thing is there's no degradation to the fish, aquatic life, insects, public, recreation, beneficial uses, or the water quality. And I say the water quality because when it leaves our property, we have 420 acres, and Kanaka Creek runs through it. When we leave our property, it's the same as it was when it entered above this mine discharge point, which is collecting underground water from old tertiary gravel channels that have been going through mineralized areas for millions of years, and for other areas, and it just happens to come out right there. On the good side of this, I'm going to work really hard to mitigate the arsenic. We did do that. We were supposed to put an arsenic study together, which we did. We spent money. We got in consultants. We did. We put the iron shavings in. Guess what? It eliminated the arsenic a little bit, but it created iron oxides going into the water. So it wasn't a win-win situation at all. We had to stop it. And I'm a little upset with the interpretation of the 1972 Clean Water Act. I've read the law, and I read it recently again and took excerpts out of it for what is really waste and what were they trying to do. We're now faced as a state. California is faced as a state with trying to go out in a remote area of Sierra County and produce drinking water from a natural mineralized zone. It's a little bit difficult to do. But I can testify. I'm under oath. I'll testify that we put in not an infeasibility study. This is a difficult task. It's going to cost time and money. But maybe we can go underground in that mine and find out a place where it's more mineralized. We can test some water. We can find out a real point source where arsenic is coming from, and maybe we can treat it there. It might be a small amount of volume. I'm glad the geologist is shaking his head because I sure don't know how to do it, and if we can do it, we're going to try. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to ask for some kind of a time frame to try to work with the water staff a little more, because this water board in the state of California someday is going to be inundated with a bunch of outside money and people that are going to come and want to reactivate our mines. It's the most proven gold deposit in the world with the fewest numbers of workers working there. And you can look in the economics of the gold mining, you can look at the finances, what's going on globally, and what's happening when these big monies go into Peru or Bolivia. Believe it or not, this is probably the safest country with all the regulations to truly try to open up a business. Because one thing I don't fear dictators or the federal governments coming in and taking our property. This is patented property. We're not on forest land. It's been under the same ownership for over 100 years. And I just happened to fall in there in 1974, and I'm facing with issues that we didn't create. We don't put anything into the water. We don't. It's running off through cracks and things, and I'm going to run out of time. Um, threat 3C, no effect on beneficial uses, no local or regional opposition, no modifications by mine of water conditions, algae in the water, no economic benefit. That's the other reason. There's been no loss to the public, the fact that this permit took this amount of time to put in place. There's nothing harmful that's going into that creek. I only brought one exhibit. And it's a roll of toilet paper.
I was hoping it was like a big piece of gold or something.
Good. Is that a question? Can I have an extra minute? The parts per million would be from Cleveland to San Francisco, bumper to bumper cars, one car. That's parts per million. Parts per billion is one of these pieces of toilet paper stretching from New York to London. This isn't, if this could be our mutual fight to try to change some of the attitudes towards one thing called arsenic to more of a reality position and maybe change some thinking in Washington, D.C., it would be wonderful to do. It would start putting money into productive things instead of things that are have less value than it costs to do that.
How much more time do you need?
Well,
that sounds like the chimes in London on Big Ben. I was scared the first time it went off today. I'd never heard it before.
I don't know. I don't need much more time. I want the opportunity to make some corrections. I was born and raised in, I was supposed to have some time because I put my card in for 10 minutes or something as just an individual, because I'm a person as well as president of this company. I was born and raised in Sacramento in 1942 and went to Bret Hart, Cal Junior High, McClatchy High School. I'm a fifth generation from California. I love this state. And if you would think about what you read or hear or what some people say against, and we're environmentalists too. Every miner I've known is well aware of the environment. We're not a stock promotion company, and I'm not either. We have great deep roots in California, and we want the best for our children and grandchildren. I would like to be able to put down myths and things, and in working with the staff, I knew the limitations that they had because they kind of told me about the laws. So I've spent more time trying to really figure out how to not compromise the staff in things that we disagree with, but how to actually bring some improvement into the economic situation, and there'll be no degradation to the environment. This board is going to be hit within probably the next 4 or 5 years with a bunch of people that were going to come in and start opening mines. And I wanted to be part of using our situation up there as part of a guidelines of what to possibly follow to have it go a little bit smoother than it happened for us. Because we're broke. We don't have big lawyers. Our industry doesn't have any lobbyists. We're a very, very vulnerable industry that I think is vital to the well-being of my state. So I just won't take any more time. I brought the permit book with me. I've got it outlined. I've read Porter Cologne probably as many times as anybody in this room over the years. And I researched, the one thing I've researched an awful lot is AS3 and AS5. And what do I want to say to, and I called the guy down in San Francisco that's on your website for the UPA federal source, and I talked to him on the phone. Because he's a toxologist, he thinks there should be no arsenic. I brought to his attention that in 2014, the medical profession is using arsenic to combat cancer. and it's modestly documented, but arsenic is a very, very interesting element. And where we have it, the small amounts that we have and what's out there is not creating any way of the harsh claims that people are claiming. Arsenic is used because it attacks the white cells that are slightly deformed, and it kills them. It kills the cancer arsenic white cells, and it's been used in medicine go back to thousands of years. I don't have any more thing, I guess, to say. I'm going to work with your staff. I'm going to try to work with the things that I believe are important to do. Like I said, if I was sitting in the audience and I heard Elaine's report, and I would think, boy, you know, but I could give you an answer to every one of those things that happened in there and why they happened and why we're a little bit concerned about them. But I won't do that now because I don't want to take any more of your time. But these people sitting right here, I hope to work with them. I hope to have the opportunity to work with them. And I hope to get our situation where we don't have to have an NBPS permit. That would be a goal. We fix the problem. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I appreciate your opening and you know, the discussion about how times have changed and staff has changed and the attitudes. First of all, I was in Forest City last fall.
You're in Forest City?
For a Boy Scout hike, and it's lovely up there.
Thank you.
Forest City kind of looks like Allegheny. It's really tiny. On Main Street, and really quaint old place. But the what I have, I mean, I know you're not contesting the order here, but it seems like you still think there's a big divide, and I just want to hear from you how you think this is going to move forward. If you think there's going to be a successful resolution, or you're going to hit something big obstacle in the moving forward.
The state of California is richer than original 16-to-1 mine. It has to be. We have to conform. I've tried my best to try to work within the system, not only with the water agency, but with another federal agency, MSHA, Mine Safety Health Administration. It's totally different, but there's things that are blocking. I mean, California got an F-, Sacramento B for over regulations and things. I'll do what's necessary because I don't want to have any lawsuits filed against us. We can, one should not, Mr. Constantino, I don't know, man. You should not be concerned about that. There's a bigger concern here because we have no choice. I gave it my best shot. I gave it my best shot. I feel it's better with this staff than it was 20 years ago. The fact that we still had to do 1,440 tests that cost this company $65,000 a year. When we stopped, we took the biggest step you could possibly take, which is stopping the mill because we were treating water then. I would like to have some help. I like the Clean Water Act because the states can get grants, and if there's a project, if this is such a big issue, join this little mine, this little company. Let's go solve the problem. That's what I wanted to do with mine tailings. I'm a problem solver, not a problem creator. And I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm very interested in trying to do things personally that are going to positively affect the future. This is a different situation right now than it was 20 years ago, and we certainly tried to convince, but we didn't do it. So I can only convince you to answer your question just by considering what I've said. You can either believe me or not believe me. That's your choice.
Any further questions?
No, but I would say that, you know, you've done a good job representing yourself and explaining your point of view, and I appreciate that you came down and talked to us, and, you know, after lunch that you came back, so thank you.
It's touch and go there for a while, I got to tell you. Yeah, I was telling Nicole,
I think
said
that's
it's
okay.
that-
I think that question was answered, Carl. We need to
Okay.
move ahead.
fight or flight.
Thank you very much. At this point in time then, I have no other cards, so we'll call for final comments by staff.
Dr. Longley, we still recommend adoption of the order today with the full commitment of staff to bring the TSO to you at the April board meeting and with late changes.
Thank you very much. I'll close the hearing then, unless there's any question by board members before I close. Seeing none, I'll close the hearing and
Dr. Long, before there's deliberation, I'd like to just suggest a few late revisions. Mr. Miller's been particularly concerned with costs that he's had to incur as a result of operation of the mine. Staff and myself, and even in consultation with the fee unit at State Board, have had an opportunity to take a look at what his fee schedule would be in terms of annual fees that he would pay as part of the permitting scheme that's been set up. And I think there's been some kind of confusion all around in establishing this threat and complexity category of 2C, because the threat complexity, setting up a threat and complexity category, generally speaking, in virtually all cases, not all cases, but virtually all cases, doesn't really get to the crux of how fees are calculated under the applicable state regulation under 23 CCR section 2200. So I'm going to make a couple suggested late revisions to the permit to strike the language as it pertains to establishing this 2C category, and also give you some context, at least in terms of how myself and staff and State Board ran the numbers in terms of what those fees would be that Mr. Miller would have to pay on an annual basis. Of course, the fee regulations change every year, but at least I can provide a snapshot, at least from our perspective, in terms of...
well, what they would pay today. And I'm interested to know, if taking out the 2C category, how does this impact Mr. Miller?
Again, for purposes of Mr. Miller, the 2C category for purposes of establishing fees in this context is really irrelevant. The point of establishing the fees under State Board's regulations under 23 CCR section 2200 is governed by, in his particular case, given his particular individual NPDES permit, is governed by a base amount plus an amount based on flow. And staff and I ran through those calculations, and we came up with a number which is a little bit more than $3,000 that he'd be paying on an annual basis under his individual NPDES permit. The only thing that would really change the fee schedule in the future, aside from an increase in flow, for example, because the fees are based on, are flow-based, is whether in fact the discharge is truly a de minimis discharge under the regulations. And we made a judgment call based on the threat to water quality, in particular arsenic and EC, that we did not think it met the requirements of a de minimis discharge, as that phrase is defined in the footnote in the regulation. But if in fact Mr. Miller is able to make that demonstration, then the permit could come back to the board. The fees could be reassessed by the State Board unit, and if in fact it was subsequently categorized as a de minimis discharge, his fees would go down approximately $1,000 as in terms of how the regs are currently structured.
About $2,000.
So he'd go from about...
Given current situations, is that
yeah,
correct?
he'd go from about a little more than $3,000 right now to a little more than $2,000.
Okay.
Right. So let me just walk through the changes
Sure.
quickly, starting with page 10 of the permit. So, looking at page 10 of the permit under special provision C, under C1B, and that's the paragraph that's labeled.
Wait a minute, not everyone's there yet. It's on page 11 of the package under board item 11.
Okay.
Yes, sorry. And under special provisions paragraph C1B, again, it's the paragraph that begins reclassification of the mine discharge. And so my suggestion is to scrap the first sentence, again, because that doesn't have any relevance or bearing on what fees he's going to incur at all, because
Okay, I'm on page,
it's a little confusing. If you look at the bottom, there are two numbers. There's an 11 and there's a 10.
oh, okay. got
So
it.
it's
Yeah, I
11
found
in the
it.
middle
I found it.
and it's 10 to the right. Okay.
Yeah. And I heard you say D, not B.
I'm sorry, it's B as in boy.
Good, thank you.
So the first sentence in that paragraph will be stricken. That's the suggestion. The next sentence will be modified to read, if analytical monitoring results consistently indicate that the mine's treatment system or best management practices reduces constituent concentrations below water quality objectives, the mine drainage may be reassessed and this order may be reopened and modified, period. That leaves open, as I mentioned previously, the possibility that in the event that the particular discharge is classified in the future as a de minimis discharge under the regulations, that State Board could set a lower fee as a result.
So, and to demonstrate that, is that based upon water quality sampling?
Absolutely. He'd have to pony up with some evidence that essentially says that there really is no threat to beneficial uses. And not only that there's really no reasonable potential. The next suggested change is on, we'll move on to page F3.
Package page 49.
Package page 49, thank you, Pamela. And again, we're just striking the two lines in table F1 as to the reference to threat to water quality 2 and complexity C.
Okay, which line, I'm there, which line are you striking?
Sure, so there are two lines there in table F1 for facility information.
Okay,
About halfway down the table, there's a line that reads threat to water quality, and it says 2, and it says complexity C. So the suggestion is to remove those two lines from table F1. The next provision or suggested change is on the following page, agenda package 50, page F4, under paragraph C. So under paragraph C, the first sentence remains the same, which begins Title 23, California Water Code Division 7. I know I'm going a little fast. Are you guys there? Are you following along?
yeah.
Okay. My suggestion is to scrap the second sentence, which reads, current NPDES program classification of the mine drainage threat to water quality and complexity is 2C as shown in table F1 and as described below. So that sentence goes away. And then the next sentence is modified to read, due to the presence of arsenic in the effluent above drinking water and aquatic life standards, the discharge cannot be classified as a de minimis discharge, period. And again, the importance of being able to classify the discharge in this case, whether in fact it meets the definition of a de minimis discharge is important for purposes of what kind of fees he'd be paying on an annual basis. And we're saying that at this time, given RP, given the arsenic and EC concerns, that he doesn't meet the requirement of a de minimis discharge. And then I'm suggesting a modification to the following sentence that begins, if analytical monitoring. Oh, I'm sorry. Correct. I'm striking the entire sentence that reads, because there's no treatment system, the facility currently qualifies for a complexity rating of category C. That line will go away in total. Or sentence, excuse me. Then the next sentence that begins, if analytical monitoring results I'm gonna just reword that sentence because I've taken out a few words from it, and I apologize, but this was something that we worked out a few hours ago. But the new sentence will read, if analytical monitoring results consistently indicate that a mining waste treatment system or best management practices reduces constituent concentrations below water quality objectives, the mine drainage may be reassessed and this permit may be reopened and modified, period. And then the next suggestion at the bottom of page F4 and at the top of page 5 is just to get rid of this discussion of NPDES program classification, because in the context in which we're talking about it, it doesn't really have any relevance. The only real relevance that the threat and complexity classification has for purposes of what fees ought to be assessed for this particular type of NPDES permit is whether in fact a surcharge would need to be added under if in fact it was categorized as 1A, 1B, or 1C. We've had numerous discussions, I think, with Mr. Miller and with staff, and that provision does not apply in this context. So the next suggested change, we're almost done. Okay, we scrapped the stuff on NPDES program classification at the bottom of F4 and F5, just so everybody's clear with that. The last suggested late revision is on page F49. Which is page 95, if that's helpful. Page 95, also known as F49. And this is in the special provisions section in paragraph B. I'm in B1B, which begins reclassification of the mine drainage. The suggestion is to scrap the first sentence altogether, to remove it. The next sentence will be modified accordingly and will read as follows. If analytical monitoring results consistently indicate that the mine's treatment system or best management practices reduces constituent concentrations below water quality objectives, the mine drainage may be reassessed and this permit may be reopened and modified, period. And that's the same language that appeared earlier that you may have noticed in a different portion of the permit. And that concludes my suggested late revisions.
And you said that you had ongoing discussions up until a few hours ago. Those discussions were with whom?
Discussions were with staff and with State Board. We had our own ideas about what we thought the fees were and how to calculate them. And
have these been presented to Mr. Miller?
They haven't been specifically presented to Mr. Miller. I think, I'm not sure if he was entirely clear on, I think he was just more concerned with being branded as having a certain threat and complexity. I think what's important to realize that it's irrelevant and doesn't really matter in the context of this individual NPDES permit being issued. Again, because the fees are based on a base amount plus flow in this particular case.
Well, I haven't closed the hearing. Mr. Miller, are you aware of, of course you must be aware now of the suggested changes.
No, I'm aware now. I listened with interest because I had some of those marked, but everything that I'd read in the past, the fees were 1, 2, 3, A, B, and C were all related to monetary amounts. So this is news to me, and it's fine.
If anything, it reduces the amount of fees I'm presuming that Mr. Miller has wanted to pay in the past. If anything, it's more a benefit to him.
Yeah, I just had looked at the fee schedule, and we were classified with that. That's what we could assume we were paying.
Good. Well,
that's fine.
And this gives you the opportunity to demonstrate de minimis.
No, this is great.
Oh, great. We appreciate that.
And one thing I just want to make clear, because even my kids don't understand this. I don't own this mine. I'm a shareholder like 1,649 other people. But, you know, it's like, so there's a bunch of us that own this stock in this company. But I got a job to do just like everybody else.
Understand. Thank you very much. Good. Is that it, David?
Thank you.
Good. Well, Yes, did somebody else? I heard somebody. Pamela, did you start to say something?
Would you like me to? No, I didn't. No, I would say that it was a number of years ago, and I think it was during the lull period with your company. But the state board did go from using the classification to a flow-based fee, and so that really, like David says, that really has no bearing on what the cost of the annual fee is, unless
Right.
you're in a certain category.
Right. Thank you. I will close the hearing now and entertain a motion.
So is there so the advantage of adopting the order now and having an effective date for later is just so that we don't have it on the agenda next
He's currently a discharger without a permit. He's at risk a lot for third-party lawsuits if we don't. So there is a risk to him if we delay adopting the permit.
Okay. So then the motion would be, David?
The motion would be to adopt the staff recommendation, which includes adoption of the NPDS permit with late revisions and direction to bring a time schedule order to the board for its consideration at the April board meeting. And I guess my revisions technically count as late revisions.
So it's late revisions and late revisions.
So that's my motion.
Okay, John
What's
has
that?
moved and.
Wait, Dr. Long, just
Denise is
can we take
second.
a quick, I think I want to consult with Adam about something, or
I'm blocked. I just wanted to, with the time schedule order or CDO, if it goes out for public notice and there's no comment and things like that, it may not have to go before the board, so I didn't want to lock us into that unless the board wanted to see it.
perfectly fair suggestion. If it's a time schedule order that's being proposed, then that's correct. It is a delegable function to the
Unless,
executive officer and would not need to come back to the
Yeah,
board.
unless I hear an objection, we'll go ahead and delegate that to the executive officer. Okay, with that understanding, call the roll.
Mr. Costantino. Ms. Ramirez. Ms. Gadara. Mr. Schneider. Dr. Longley.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Good, thank you very much. Thank everybody for their patience. We're going to take a short break, just about 5-6 minutes here. And 15 after, we're back in session for the last item of the day. And that'll be, if I'm correct, it's the last item of the day. And that'll be the enforcement report. Excuse me. No, I can't. I don't even think about those things now. That's the advantage of getting what I have. You just food. Go away. I'm on the record, I guess, saying that food doesn't appeal. I don't want a donut. Yes. Next item on the agenda is moving back here. I believe item 7, am I correct? Yes. Right. At this time, we'll receive the annual report on Region 5's enforcement program. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the staff presentation, interested parties will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Hello, Dr. Longley and members of the board. My name is Robert LaRue, and I am a Senior Water Resource Control Engineer and the Enforcement Coordinator for the Central Valley region. Today I'll be providing you with an update on our enforcement actions over the previous year, as well as some context from prior years, as well as an outlook for the future. Before I get started, I just wanted to mention that if you wish to view any of the previous enforcement updates to the board, you could visit the Central Valley Regional Board homepage and then click on Enforcement in the center of the screen, and it'll take you to the enforcement webpage, which if you scroll down, you'll see the previous enforcement updates to the board. This presentation will be included after today. Last year, I introduced myself as the new enforcement coordinator, and I was immediately asked, did we have an old enforcement coordinator? Since then, I found that you are not alone in that sentiment, and there's something about a business card that reads enforcement coordinator that seems to get more than a few raised eyebrows. So please humor me as I try to introduce myself and what my role is here. I've now been in this position for 18 months, prior to which I worked for the state board for 6 years, and prior to that, I worked in private consulting for 6 years. I'm also a licensed civil engineer in the state of California. This position is a senior specialist, so no staff report directly to me, and I report directly to our Assistant Executive Officer, Andrew Altavote. On this slide is a list of some of my responsibilities here, including coordination and outreach, triaging complaints from our website, data collection and reporting from our databases, program management with respect to portfolio management, organizational structure, and coordination of our supplemental environmental projects, or SEPs. I'll go over these roles and responsibilities in greater detail over the next few slides. Please feel free to stop me at any time to ask a question. Otherwise, there should be ample time at the end of this presentation for questions. One of my greatest responsibilities is coordinating and prioritizing our enforcement efforts between our 3 offices and seeking consistency with the other regions and state board. To that end, I schedule and conduct meetings with the seniors and supervisors working in enforcement to update our lead prosecutor on the cases that staff are working on. I maintain records of these cases that staff are working on and request updates from seniors and supervisors to summarize for the meetings. This enables us to prioritize our cases and share information across the various programs. I also participate in enforcement roundtable meetings facilitated by the State Board's Office of Enforcement and attended by all the enforcement coordinators from each region. These meetings provide information on statewide initiatives in enforcement and a format for the enforcement staff to discuss similar cases in other regions. These meetings help foster consistency in our approach to our enforcement cases. Finally, I have represented our agency in a few environmental task forces facilitated by county prosecutors and attended by environmental protection agencies in all levels of government. I believe that these meetings have been beneficial in sharing information and strategies and identifying cases where we could share our resources. I also receive the environmental complaints that come in from our website. It's not the easiest link or page to find, so I thought I would just point it out again while I'm here. If you go to our website and look almost all the way down on the left, you will see File an Environmental Complaint. Click on that, and it will take you to this page. We will find the form to submit a complaint to the California Environmental Protection Agency, or Cal EPA, complaints database. By putting a check mark next to the box marked Water, you would effectively be sending a complaint to the Water Board. Those complaints that occur within the Central Valley and aren't specifically associated with something that a state board division handles, for example, a water rights complaint, would come to my attention. I should mention that Cal EPA and the Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC, are currently upgrading this website to make it easier to find, more user-friendly, and have greater tracking capability with respect to sharing complaints between agencies. Upon receipt of the complaint, we determine if it is within our jurisdiction, whereupon it gets routed to the appropriate senior or supervisor. If it's outside of our jurisdiction or requires multi-agency action, we forward the complaint to the appropriate agency. In the last year, through the website, we received 124 complaints. Of those, 117 have been either investigated and responded to or forwarded to another agency that agreed to take responsibility for the complaint. As of January 27th, there are 7 continuing investigations, all of which are for complaints that were received late in 2014. For the complaints that are not received through the website, each individual program or section manager handles and tracks them. When I receive a complaint by phone, I try to notify the complainant that the website exists not as a deterrent, but rather as another option if they didn't wish to call in.
And Robert,
Yes.
you said you had 124 complaints. Is that total from the website, or is that just complaints that are water related?
That's total for Central Valley region complaints that we received through the website for 2014.
Okay.
I also track, organize, and report on our performance metric data, such as the number of inspections conducted and permits adopted per program. This information is reported on the State Board's website annually and in the Executive Officer's report for each board meeting. This data has also been used by the Office of Enforcement and the State Board's accomplishment report, among myriad other inquiries and requests. There are 3 primary databases for these reports: California Integrated Water Quality System, or CWIX, Stormwater Multi-Application Reporting and Tracking System, or SMARTS, and GeoTracker. This slide shows the databases and their accompanying programs that utilize them. With respect to portfolio management, the enforcement program is the largest of the programs and includes all staff that prepare enforcement actions such as notices of violation or cleanup and abatement orders. This is the first year of this initiative, and in about April, I developed a work plan and an organizational chart and distributed them to staff in the program. In September, we held a kickoff meeting for the program to get all the staff in the program from all 3 offices together to talk about the work plan and our goals for the year. We used the meeting as an opportunity to bring in some guest speakers and do some training on our enforcement policy. The overall feedback was very positive, and I think that it was a good springboard for future years of this endeavor. In the remainder of the fiscal year, staff will be following up on our program goals, reporting back to our executive management group, and developing next year's organizational structure and work plan. Finally, I am the lead contact person for Supplemental Environmental Projects, or SEPs, in the region. A SEP is an alternative method for dischargers to satisfy part of the monetary assessment imposed as part of administrative civil liability, or ACL. SEPs are projects that enhance the beneficial uses of the waters of the state, provide a benefit to the public at large, and are not otherwise required by the discharger. Penalty money that is not used towards a SEP would otherwise be administered by State Board. The benefit to the region is that we have some say in what projects are being funded and the projects are staying within our region. SEPs include $150,000 bridge funding that ultimately resulted in high-quality drinking water for West Goshen, considered a severely disadvantaged community. In March of last year, the board adopted a resolution to allow the Rose Foundation to act as a third party and facilitate 14 water quality improvement projects for disadvantaged communities. Including the Rose Foundation SEPs, the region secured about $850,000 in SEP funding in 2014. I'm going to talk a little bit more about SEPs and our efforts with the Rose Foundation later on in this presentation. What I hope the takeaway is from this section is that staff at the region wear a lot of hats, but with respect to these particular efforts, if there is something that I can provide clarification on, I'm happy to do so. The next section of this presentation will deal with our region's compliance and enforcement activities as a whole. Topics covered include staff resources and workload, compliance efforts, our enforcement policy, statistics from our enforcement efforts, a couple of case studies, and an outlook for the future. About a quarter of our resources have been identified as utilized for compliance and enforcement activities. This allocation is distributed amongst 111 staff and approximately 54 PY, or person years. The other resources are involved in planning and assessment, permitting, and administrative efforts. I believe that as we continue to evolve in the portfolio management process, our understanding of all the work that staff do within the region will continue to be refined. This slide shows the overall workload in the various enforcement programs in the region. This list summarizes the number of permits, general order enrollees, etc., that are overseen by our compliance and enforcement staff. The bottom line is that there are over 40,000 cases that are overseen by staff working in compliance and enforcement. Issuing an enforcement action represents the culmination of significant effort on behalf of staff. Obtaining compliance with our permits is the primary goal in all of our enforcement actions. Typical compliance work that could result in violations and an enforcement action includes monitoring report reviews, field inspections, and responses to complaints. If a violation is noted, staff determine the appropriate enforcement action in accordance with the policy. In the fiscal year of 2013-14, staff conducted over 1,400 inspections. The enforcement policy was adopted by the State Board in 2010 and provides board staff with a framework for enforcement actions. The policy provides guidance on prioritizing enforcement actions by ranking violations, outlines the available tools in progressive enforcement, explains the methodology for assessing ACL penalties, and lists potential alternatives to satisfying financial penalties such as SEPs. Excuse me. As a case transitions from compliance to enforcement, staff will request an attorney from the Office of Enforcement be assigned to assist with the progression of the case. Generally, the program supervisor makes this request, but I facilitated it on behalf of staff in a couple of circumstances. There are also 3 Office of Enforcement attorney liaisons assigned to our region to assist staff should they have any questions and an attorney has not yet been assigned. In addition to the attorneys, technical staff at the Office of Enforcement have worked with our staff by providing technical assistance and coordinating training events. This slide shows our enforcement action numbers from this past calendar year with respect to the model, of progressive enforcement that we'd follow. As the pyramid goes up, so does our staff resources per enforcement action. That is to say, the amount of staff time it takes to prepare an administrative civil liability is significantly greater than to issue a notice of violation, which is an informal enforcement action. Likewise, the severity of the enforcement action also increases. That is, an ACL represents our most punitive enforcement action. The red dashed line at the bottom represents the line between formal and informal enforcement actions. Informal enforcement actions are those that are taken by staff that are not defined in statute. Staff generally make every effort to resolve a potential violation or gain compliance by issuing informal enforcement actions. This slide shows the same pyramid, but with enforcement actions over the past 5 years. For the most part, you can see that the enforcement statistics generally reduce as the pyramid goes up. One exception is the number of ACLs. However, of the 337 ACLs that were issued in the last 5 years, 201, or about 60%, were for mandatory minimum penalty assessments for NPDES wastewater violations. For mandatory minimum penalties, or MMPs, Regional Board must assess an ACL for the mandatory minimum amount of $3,000 per violation or for a greater amount. In 2008, the State Board developed a statewide initiative to address the backlog of MMPs, which at that time exceeded 12,000 violations. Today, the backlog has been reduced to 1,200 violations, for which the Central Valley is responsible for 27. It is our goal to have these violations addressed with ACLs by the end of this fiscal year. Staff have found that as dischargers receive an ACL for MMP violations, their likelihood of receiving additional MMP ACLs decreases significantly. This slide shows the number of informal enforcement actions that staff have issued per year according to CWICS over the last 5 years. The region has averaged about 1,000 informal enforcement actions per year over that period, including 917 last year. You may notice the increased number of verbal communications conducted in 2012. I was not here in 2012, but looking at the data, I noticed that just under 500, or about 75%, were for this construction stormwater program. The increase in verbal communications in 2012 represented an effort on the part of staff at that time to notify dischargers of potentially greater enforcement actions, as construction dischargers were being required to submit annual reports, which had previously been required of industrial stormwater dischargers. Excuse me. This slide shows a number of formal enforcement actions over the past 5 years, according to CWIX. The region issued 141 formal enforcement actions in 2014, which is right around the 5-year average of about 150. There have been some fluctuations in the number of investigative orders issued. Water Code sections 13267 and 13383 allow the water boards to conduct investigations and require technical or monitoring reports from any person who has discharged or may discharge in accordance with the conditions of those sections. In 2010 and 2011, the majority of investigative orders were in the dairy program, which was a relatively new program at the time. In 2012, the industrial stormwater program had a significant enough number of uncooperative dischargers to warrant issuing 98 of the 113 investigative orders that year. All 98 dischargers complied with the orders and issued their technical reports. There was no such effort in 2013, and only 6 investigative orders are reported in CWIX. It's likely that there were more investigative orders issued as conditions of other enforcement actions, such as notices of violation, but they were entered into our databases as those other enforcement actions. In 2014, the majority of investigative orders were issued in the industrial stormwater program in an effort similar to 2012, but with fewer dischargers. Next, I would like to talk about a few notable cases that staff worked on this past year. The Caltrans Sonora Bypass ACL settlement, Rubicon Trail cleanup and abatement order rescission, Newmont Mining Company cleanup and abatement order, and Rose Foundation Disadvantaged Community SEP settlements. For the Caltrans Sonora Bypass project, located in Tuolumne County, staff performed a number of inspections of the site in the winter of 2012-2013. The first photo on the top left was taken from staff's first inspection on October 16, 2012. The subsequent photos were taken as part of subsequent inspections, either during or following rain events. A lack of stormwater best management practices, or BMPs, was observed by staff during each of these inspections, and a general depreciation of the site can be seen in the photos. Eventually, Caltrans did address the site and implement BMPs, but by that time, staff had observed a number of violations. Ultimately, staff calculated a stormwater discharge of over 800,000 gallons to the waters of the state. After a multi-year effort, staff reached a settlement with Caltrans in 2014 for $2.7 million. This settlement included a $443,000 SEP that proposed Caltrans installing and performing real-time monitoring of the Merced River, providing remote and early detection for turbidity and pH. This effort also resulted in greater communication between our two agencies and a better understanding on Caltrans' part of our diligence with respect to potential stormwater discharges.
So where does that money come from, and where does it go, since it's state to state?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly where it came from in Caltrans's budget. My understanding is that it came from a couple different places, and there's some processes they had to go through to get that money authorized to us. But I'm not exactly sure where it came from. I don't believe it was general fund, but I don't know exactly what the source of their funds to pay that penalty was.
It ends up in the cleanup abatement account, doesn't it?
Oh, it ends up,
Right,
other
that's
than
what-
the
that's
SEP
what-
money, it ends up in the
That's right,
cleanup
it's
and abatement
important,
account.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the SEP funds are handled separately, is that correct?
That's correct. They're treated as a suspended liability until the project.
This isn't the first time that Caltrans has had to pay us money.
Staff presented an in-depth presentation on a cleanup and abatement order issued to address water quality issues on the Rubicon Trail during the October board meeting, so I'm going to try to be brief. but I believe that this is a good example of how we can work with responsible parties even in the context of an enforcement order. In 2009, the board issued a cleanup and abatement order to El Dorado County and the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service El Dorado National Forest. Vehicles have driven on the Rubicon Trail for over 100 years. In the 1950s, the Rubicon became one of the most famous four-wheel drive trails in the world. The trail includes well-defined dirt and gravel roads as well as challenging conditions for four-wheel drive vehicles. Prior to the cleanup and abatement order, there were many areas on the trail which had 3 to 4 feet of soil eroded away, as shown by the photo on the left. As a result of the order, the county installed over 475 BMPs to reduce sediment movement, an example which is shown on the right. The county has enlisted four-wheel drive user groups to monitor and maintain these BMPs. Prior to issuance of the cleanup and abatement order, the rest facilities were limited and unsanitary. Now there's a vault toilet and 8 portable toilets located along the trail. Money awarded through the fundraising efforts following issuance of the cleanup and abatement order enabled the Rubicon Trail Foundation to obtain a four-wheel drive septic hauler to empty the toilets on a regular basis. The success of the responsible parties in complying with the cleanup and abatement order led to a much healthier activity order in terms of water quality, and this board rescinded the cleanup and abatement order during the October 2014 board hearing. Staff issued a similar cleanup and abatement order to the Newmont Mining Company to assist their efforts to work with the City of Grass Valley in developing a strategy for mine water discharges to the city's wastewater treatment plant. In August of 2014, Title 27 permitting and mining unit staff completed a cleanup and abatement order requiring Newmont to install a treatment system to address mine water discharge through a passive wetland treatment system to remove iron and manganese. A similar system is being employed at the Empire Mine site shown in the bottom photo. Prior to issuance of the cleanup and abatement order, the two parties were having difficulties coming together for resolution to the mine water discharge. Now the city and Newmont are working together, and Newmont has been providing quarterly status reports and is on track to complete construction of the wetland treatment system by December of 2015. Status updates have been provided in the two most recent executive officers' reports and will continue to be included as updates are received. In October of 2014, regional board staff reached settlement agreements with two separate oil firms for fracking fluid discharges into unlined pits. The settlements totaled over $476,000, of which 50% or $238,000 has been allocated for the first Rose Foundation supplemental environmental projects that the region has funded. As a result of this agreement, the Community Water Center received $220,000 for their project titled simply Clean Water for Disadvantaged Communities. The project sets out to identify communities in northern Tulare County and southern Kern County that are reliant on domestic wells in areas of vulnerable, if not impacted, groundwater. Through their outreach efforts, the Community Water Center seeks to support disadvantaged communities in the area to participate in regional drinking water planning processes, endeavoring to ultimately source high-quality water for those communities. The Rose Foundation is providing oversight of this project and will report on milestones in subsequent annual reports to the board. For the developing enforcement programs, I've listed them from the most established to least. That is, the oil field and marijuana programs can anticipate experiencing some of the same issues that the irrigated lands program is currently experiencing, such as preparing enforcement actions for hearing and settlement negotiations. These programs each pose their own individual challenges with respect to enforcement, including getting their respective discharges to become familiar with the associated regulations, identifying violations during field activities, and safety concerns associated with field work. In addition to our developing programs that are ramping up their enforcement actions, other challenges include new general orders that are being implemented this year. And despite staff endeavoring to notify dischargers in advance, the new requirements could result in additional violations and enforcement actions. Prioritization of enforcement actions continues to be critical to balancing our cases over the resources that we have available. Staff prioritize cases first by threat or potential threat to water quality, and then by threat to the program's viability. That is to say, staff interpret negligence with complying with our permits and orders penultimate only to observed or potential discharges. Also, securing funding for SEPs in settlement negotiations continues to be a challenge. However, I think that our efforts in this past year, particularly with the Rose Foundation initiative, will continue to bear fruit in 2015. To that end, staff have publicly noticed the revised resolution and associated project list for 2015 to our website. Staff are also looking into alternative methods of securing funds for our SEP projects, including applications to the cleanup and abatement account. Finally, staff in the non-point source program invited me to provide a brief presentation about SEPs last year, as they were interested in reaching out to their integrated regional watershed management groups, or IRWIM groups, about the program. Subsequent to that meeting, staff in that program approached me about assembling fact sheets to distribute to those stakeholders and have offered their support for this endeavor. I just wanted to take this opportunity to voice my appreciation for their efforts. This concludes my presentation. I want to thank the staff, seniors, and supervisors who helped me in developing it, and I would like to now open it up for any questions or comments you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, very good report, very thorough, and I particularly like the, I'm glad you didn't put these four on a page because my eyes are not as good as they used to be, and the small print is hard to read. We had a slide earlier today, I think, that was a little bit over the limit of visibility, readability, I should say. Any questions from board members? Yes, John.
I do. On the you had a slide with the the buck stops here button.
Yes.
So how does that mean you as the enforcement coordinator, all the penalty settlement amounts come through you, or how does that work?
No, in that regard, I mostly just meant, I think this is what you're referring to?
Yes.
Is that correct? The only bottom line I meant in that regard was with respect to these responsibilities that I was covering in the slides prior to that. I'm not involved in every settlement negotiation. Generally, in the larger settlement negotiations, I'm involved. And one of the biggest reasons for that is to kind of push our SEPs and the initiative that we have with the Rose Foundation, but I certainly don't approve every settlement amount.
Is there one person who sees all settlement negotiations?
Yes, me. Although I can explain further if you'd like how we do that, but
well, the question just is consistency, and I missed
Sure.
the sort of the enforcement item last month. So if you just want to take a couple seconds to talk about that.
Sure. So I mean, so in terms of Robert's role, his role is to basically bring all of our enforcement efforts together amongst the staff to make sure that there's kind of a common understanding at the sort of the staff and the senior level of what our general approaches are to sort of to track all the different enforcement things that we may have going on at any one time. And then my role as the lead prosecutor is really to ensure that, especially for administrative civil liabilities, for settlements, and for penalties, that we're being as consistent as possible in certainly between the three offices, and so that's something that I work with Clay Rogers and with Clint Snyder on for any of the cases that they're doing out of their offices, as well as to try as much as possible to reflect our understanding of what the board would like across programs, and so that's kind of what I view my role as.
That role was with our executive officer until we asked her to become the advisor to the board, and Andrew was the person who now fills that role. And as I understand it, sort of a daunting task when you first looked at it. Very good. Any further questions? Yes, I have Carmen's on.
Oh, all right. I think All right, well, I'll go first. Sorry,
All right.
Denise, I'm just jump right in. So being that you are, the prosecutor, do you, are you the person that says, okay, this is the kind of thing that I'd like to, I'm looking at slide 17 and then slide 18, and when you look at a complaint that comes in, do you say, okay, let's try an informal enforcement action first, and then if that doesn't work, who decides when it gets kicked up to the next rung? Is it you? Is it collaborative? How does that work?
Generally, as far as the lower rungs on there, those are decisions that are made by the seniors and the supervisors. And I think in general, it would only come to myself or to one of the to Clint Snyder or to Clay Rogers as it goes up that realm. Probably, as you get into the realm of cleanup and abatement orders and ACLs. But that said, there are some important efforts that we've had throughout the region where we needed to, there was an issue like Clay has talked about some of the oil field activities and the investigative reports, and so that was something that that he was very much directly involved in for a number of reasons. So it depends a little bit on the circumstance, but in general, a lot of those investigative orders and things like that are done at the staff level, and I work with my enforcement staff, and Clay and Clint do the same thing to ensure that that they have an understanding of kind of what they can do without consulting us, which is good because there's a lot of work that goes on, and what things kind of rise to a level of importance that that we want to weigh in on, and in general, and this is again part of Robert's role, is assuring that across the region there's a common understanding among staff as to how we want to pursue things with our best understanding of how the board would like things to progress.
If I could just, so I'll just speak for my previous, and I think Robert can elaborate more, but there are regularly scheduled meetings with the enforcement, the AEOs and the enforcement staff to decide what moves up the chain of enforcement. And I think annually, if not more, we meet with the OE attorneys to do a prioritization of sites. So they do go through the database and look at the different sites that they think need more attention than others. So there is a process that's involved, but at every step of the way, when it moves up into real enforcement, cleanup and abatement, the real formal ones that usually end up before the board, that usually is always involving an AEO at that level and deciding to move forward or not.
Any further questions?
I'd just like to add on to what Pamela and Andrew said. During our prioritization meetings, we generally have at least one Office of Enforcement attorney present or at least on the phone, so they can add their input for those prioritization.
Yes, thank you.
I'm
Denise, go ahead.
Yes. First of all, Robert, it's a great report. It's good to have all this information as a newcomer to the board to see the work that you're doing and the ranking that it goes to. It's very impressive. But my question was when I saw Caltrans here, and I don't know if, it's not really an enforcement question, but to staff, how or what is the process, or is there a process for when you have state agencies that do projects of this type?
I can certainly answer some of the questions to when we treat them very much like a regular discharger when it's on the lower rungs of that enforcement strategy. They have their contractors that they hire. Sometimes they don't spend enough money with the contractors, and for whatever reason, same reasons that motivate some developers on occasion. When it gets to the level where there will be an administrative civil liability action or a significant cleanup and abatement order, that's something that does go through the governor's office to a degree. So it runs up to Michael Lawfer. They know that this is coming through the pipeline. They know it's a very significant issue that they're going to be facing, because generally speaking, the governor and the legislature likes the agencies to all get along, but when one transgresses the rules, they have to be held accountable as well.
Okay, but where I'm trying to go with this is that, from a planning background, when a developer came in to do a project, there was a checklist of every agency that you had to go through to make sure there was clearance or there was coordination. That, if that's not in place, I mean, I'm just saying.
They are.
Okay.
I mean, it's just not Caltrans. We've had significant enforcements against parks, the Parks Department, and prisons, corrections. But in Caltrans, because of this Sonora one, we've been dealing with them a lot over the years. We've had extensive working with their lower. So what we did this year, because of this, we got Cal EPA involved and State Board involved, and we brought in all of our district directors into a meeting in this room, and I meet with them, and we meet regularly now to catch up on projects. But out of that came that basically I told the directors, you need to know what's going on because this is costing your agency money. And so what we do now is that all of our directors now are personally involved in the stormwater program. And that finally got the attention of their resident engineers, who some of them were really good and some of them were like, well, maybe we'll comply, maybe we won't. But now they're much more diligent because their bosses are now caring about what's going on.
That was my question. I just wanted to make sure there is a process in place. 'Cause
We put it in place, and with the help of the Cal EPA and the agencies.
Communication problem.
Yeah.
You got one more, Carl?
Yeah, I see you here, John.
I know it's time to go, but on slide 14, and maybe it's just semantics, but to me, 40,000 cases means there's 40,000 enforcement issues, not 40,000 permits or compliance reviews. And it just, maybe it's semantics, but it just, everybody's not automatically on the enforcement radar, right?
This is about compliance and enforcement.
Yeah, that's correct.
You can't just move to enforcement without a compliance activity.
Right. It struck me as.
But every staff has to look at the work that's submitted by 40,000 dischargers.
Yeah, in that brother in cases, dischargers would have been a better word. Any further comments or questions? Very good report. And
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us up to date.
I would, if I could just take a second, and I'd like maybe
No,
Andrew
your
to.
second's up.
Sorry, because I am concerned about the SEPs. And at the MCC meeting recently, Tom Howard raised an issue or concern that a lot of the regional boards were doing SEPs, but not SEPs associated with disadvantaged communities. And the fact that as those monies are pulled aside, that's less money in the cleanup and abatement account that could go to communities that need drinking water. We do have the Rose Foundation, and we've been successful in that. We were unsuccessful with Caltrans in promoting a SEP through the Rose Foundation because of this. Andrew can better explain it, but they were reluctant to put money into it because they were still kept on the hook for their liability until the project was complete, and I think we're trying to work through that now. But the State Board is concerned about that, so I wanted to make sure that you're aware that we will be as diligent as possible to make sure we just have SEPs that will benefit disadvantaged communities as much as possible, and try to put the rest in the cleanup and abatement account. But I don't know if we've made any progress on the SEPs with the
Yeah, and Patrick can address the particulars, but in the resolution that's going to, I think it's out for public comment now. We've actually changed that so that that liability provision, or the suspension of liability, is set up now to make it easier on dischargers to not completely, and Patrick will explain the details, but to essentially be able to write a check and start the project and then have their liability for that portion of it dismissed.
And Andrew's exactly right. As you may recall, last year we embarked on a project with the Rose Foundation whereby they would help get money into disadvantaged communities through SEPs, understanding that a lot of disadvantaged communities don't necessarily have the expertise to put together a project prospectus the same way other SEP proposals were put on the table. Rose Foundation has done that. They've proposed a new list for the new year. We, myself, Robert's worked on this, Tim Little with the Rose Foundation has worked on this, have revised the resolution approving that, And frankly, we're giving the broadest possible interpretation to the language within the SEP policy, the statewide SEP policy, to allow them to essentially, as much as we're able to, when they write the check to the Rose Foundation, and when the Rose Foundation allocates those funds to a project that it's vetted to the board, even if it's not necessarily vetted at a board hearing, that essentially as soon as those funds are committed, the discharger's off the hook. The issue with Caltrans is they wanted to cut the check and that was the end of it for them. There's basically one or two more little hoops that you have to jump through. Maybe not full completion of the project, which may be several years away, but at least a commitment in writing, that the board could take legal action on if it was violated, that says that the Rose Foundation, their partners, will commit to get those funds into the proper hands. If they don't, the money's still due from somebody. So that's really what we're doing. That's what the hurdle is. There's been a lot of debate over the years about what that means. I think that coming straight from Tom Howard on down, the state board is willing to, within reason, take some risks to make sure that these communities get the money that's sorely needed.
Thank you. Does that answer? Good. Thank you very much. I have a card from Laurel Firestone.
Thank you. On this topic, we haven't been able to come to the board and say thank you for the SEP award that we were granted and that we've been able to get started with the Rose Foundation. And so I wanted to first of all come and say thank you, and thank you for approving this program. This is really the first of its kind in the state, and is really a model that other regions are looking at and other agencies are looking at. And we are really honored to be the first grantee under it. And it's really filling a need and a particular niche within funding programs to make sure that that the fines that are collected stay within the region and help support programs and projects that are really going to advance the needs of disadvantaged communities and fill some niches that state funding programs or federal funding programs don't easily fit. So I wanted to give you a brief. We've signed the contract and are getting started with our program. And so now that I have that all finalized, I wanted to just give you a brief overview of what it is and then answer questions and would be more than happy to provide updates or more information. There's three main components. The first is really water quality testing for private well owners. So outreach, education, water quality testing, and then report back to private well owners in areas where there's no high likelihood of contamination or known contamination in that region. And we're targeting to start with private well owners in areas where we also know that there's projects underway where there's an opportunity for them to potentially connect into larger systems. So we want to target those now where they're both extremely vulnerable and also able to take advantage of funding and opportunities to get connected in before that window closes, and it may be harder down the road to get funding to do that. So that's particularly true in northern Tulare County and South Kern. There's sort of more regional projects going on and a number of private well owners surrounding those projects that may not have otherwise been able to even know what their water quality is and how they might be able to connect to have more reliable water. We also are really looking at this as an opportunity to develop a program that ideally it maybe learn from and see if it makes sense to expand or continue more broadly, and want to be working with the board to make sure that any data collected can be used to both help the community understand their water and help the board with its understanding of water quality and the public. So the other two components, sorry, do you mind if I'll one more minute?
That's the Tower of London bells
okay.
again.
Sorry, is that okay?
It struck the hour in London. Go ahead.
So is it okay if I just explain the other two very quickly? Or?
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
So the other two components are, one is education and outreach, and we're working with community-based groups in primarily in Tulare County and South Kern and some parts of Fresno to do outreach and education to help understand what's in their water and what they can do about it in the short term, and also opportunities for long-term solutions. And then the last piece is around connecting disadvantaged communities to regional watershed management planning efforts. So that's integrated regional water management plans. That's also now some of the efforts around sustainable groundwater management agencies and sustainable groundwater management plans that are going to be developed under the new law that was just enacted this past year, trying to make sure that disadvantaged communities that their needs and their projects are directly integrated into those efforts, and that we're developing more regional solutions. And that's been something that the region collaboratively has identified as a need, and we're hopeful now that we have some staff that can help support that. And we've also connected with regional board staff that are participating in those efforts to try and leverage that as well. So really appreciate it. Be happy to answer questions and provide more information.
And if I understand the IREM issue, those communities, and what you refer today, or what's referred today as a DUC or DUC, is that typically they don't have the resources to develop the plans that they need to present to the IREM. Other disadvantaged communities may be disadvantaged according to medium household income, but if they're large enough, they have enough resources to hire the engineer and get their report in front of the IREM, and they're successful. But we got am I correct? All kinds of DUCs out there that just can't compete at all for funding. And it's to be able to get to those and develop the reporting, and this gets back to grouping of communities, so you can do it on a regional area and other approaches that might give success.
Yes, so there's both the issue of there was a number of communities that were trying to get IRWM money to put in meters with the drought, and couldn't even get ranked high enough to be included in the applications that went forward. And then there's also issues of just how are we helping the regions be able to develop water quality projects to actually improve water quality in the region, rather than just supply projects, which tend to take precedence often.
They didn't even recognize what had to occur in there, the kind of information they had to present. In some cases, the other part of it is that there was some funding required up front just for the application, and these communities don't have that kind of money. So how do you get over those barriers? I think those are the things that this funding that we're talking about can at least provide part of the solution.
So, and yeah, mostly I also just want to say thank you again. Really, really incredible program. So thankful for it. So thankful and honored that we can be the pilot project, sort of, to speak in this, and want to keep you all informed as we progress and learn from it. So thank you.
I think that we feel lucky to have you as a partner. So I'm glad you're a good advocate for those projects, and we're glad that you're involved.
Any further comments? Denise says no. John sitting there quietly. Carmen just spoke.
I could
Good.
speak some more.
Thanks.
Great job.
Very good. We thank you very much for your presentation, Laurel, and we'll be back in session tomorrow at 9 o'clock.